Welcome to Exhausting Stories, where history drifts softly into the quiet of night. Few Indian rulers struck fear into the British East India Company like Tipu Sultan, the Tiger of Mysore, and his story ended in a single night remembered by many as a night of betrayal. He was a ruler who transformed Mysore into a formidable power, with rockets that lit up the skies, alliances that unsettled empires, and an army that rivaled Europe's best. Yet with that ambition came upheaval, rocket barrages scattering soldiers in fear, temple doorways left empty of worshippers, lives shaped by both courage and cruelty. Some remember him as a freedom fighter who resisted empire, others as a tyrant whose quest for power imposed suffering. His legacy remains deeply contested. Tonight, as you listen by the fire, we'll drift back into the records, letters and accounts that reveal both his vision and its cost. To understand the choices he made, we must first step into the world he was born into, a world already scarred by war. Also, please like and subscribe so we can continue making more exhausting stories for dreamers everywhere. Thank you. Now, let's begin. What shapes a young prince into believing he could defy one of the richest powers in the world? For Tipu Sultan, the answer began in his earliest years under the shadow of his father, Hyder Ali. Hyder was not born into royalty. He rose step by step through the ranks, from soldier to commander, until he seized control of Mysore. His climb carried a lesson his son never forgot. Power was not inherited like treasure. It was earned, guarded, and defended. Tipu's childhood was not a life of ceremony, but of ambition woven into survival itself. Under Hyder Ali, Mysore lived in constant tension, caught between Indian rivals and the expanding British East India Company. The company was not yet an empire, but its armies, ships and coffers already overshadowed much of India. For young Tipu, Mysore seemed to exist in the tightening grip of this foreign force. His upbringing prepared him less for courtly rituals than for a lifetime of sieges and campaigns. Tipu's education combined tradition with strategy. He studied Persian and the languages of court, the tools of diplomacy and governance. But he also learned maps, tactics, and the fragile art of alliances. Sources say his tutors sharpened his awareness of regional instability and the growing British threat, while his later letters reveal how seriously he absorbed these lessons. For him, classrooms were not retreats from danger. They were training grounds for the trials ahead. Even as a teenager, Tipu was no bystander. He rode with Hyder Ali into campaigns, and in his mid-teens, commanded men in battle. Accounts describe him on horseback, issuing orders under fire, not as a token presence, but as a leader. These early encounters gave him something rare among rulers his age: the taste of command and the knowledge that soldiers would follow. Victories in these moments electrified him, planting the belief that Mysore could resist the company if it had discipline and daring on its side. When Hyder Ali died, Tipu inherited more than a throne. He inherited a mission. By the late 18th century, the British had already subdued smaller rulers across South India, swallowing territories with a mix of treaties and threats. Many believed resistance was futile, survival possible only through compromise. Tipu rejected that view. He did not see Mysore as destined to shrink or bend before outside powers. With startling conviction, he believed defiance was both possible and necessary. The victories of his youth fed this resolve. Each campaign, even against British detachments, strengthened his sense that he was chosen for something greater. His identity fused with the fate of Mysore itself. Defeat would mean not only the end of his kingdom, but the end of his destiny. Victory would prove his ambition justified. In that tension, Tipu began to see himself not merely as a ruler, but as a rival to empire. Yet ambition was a double-edged force. It gave him the courage to imagine Mysore as a challenger to the company's influence, but it also narrowed his vision. He placed deep trust in innovation and discipline to overcome overwhelming odds. His faith in intellect made him bold enough to picture a future where Mysore did not bow beneath Europe, but stood beside it. From fire and uncertainty, Tipu emerged as a leader unwilling to settle for survival. He dreamed of a state that could project strength and model independence for the rest of India, but belief alone was not enough. To face an empire with vast resources, Tipu would need new ideas, new weapons, and methods few rulers had ever imagined. It was in building his army and his state that his ambition would take its most striking form. How did Mysore, a relatively small South Indian kingdom, come to unsettle British generals across the empire? The answer lay in the way Tipu Sultan reshaped his military. His aim was not to simply grow in numbers, but to adopt technologies and strategies that made his forces unpredictable and deadly. Suddenly, a kingdom once dismissed as minor became one of the few that could seriously resist the East India Company. The imbalance of power was staggering. The company drew vast wealth from trade and annexed lands, commanding armies far larger than most Indian states. Against such resources, Mysore seemed too small to matter. Yet Tipu refused weakness. Through innovation, he transformed his army into a force capable of shaking the confidence of the world's most powerful trading company. His most famous invention was the iron-cased rocket. Rockets had been used before in India, but they were fragile, built of bamboo and prone to failure. Mysore's workshops replaced bamboo with hammered iron, packing gunpowder tighter and extending range and force. Contemporary reports claimed they could reach nearly 2 kilometers when fired at the right angle. To troops accustomed to the steady rhythm of muskets and cannon, these rockets were something else entirely. Soldiers described fiery trails curving unpredictably through the sky, some bursting in mid-air, others bouncing wildly across the ground. Horses panicked, formations scattered, and confusion rippled across battlefields. These were no mere fireworks. They struck farther than much field artillery of the era, and their erratic flight made them terrifying. The shriek and blast disoriented troops, but massed volleys magnified the effect, streaks of fire tearing through advancing ranks without warning. British officers recorded moments when discipline collapsed, not from casualties alone, but from the psychological shock of men breaking under a storm of unpredictable fire. During the Second Anglo-Mysore War, entire battalions wavered and fell back beneath these barrages. Captured rockets were later shipped to Britain, studied, and became the model for the Congreve rockets used in 19th century European wars. Yet rockets were only one part of Tipu's reforms. He looked outward as well, drawing on French engineers and officers for advice in artillery, fortification design, and infantry drilling. French support was uneven and often disappointing, but the knowledge exchanged mattered. His regiments blended European-style discipline with Mysore's own traditions, especially its mobile cavalry. This gave his forces a flexibility the company found deeply frustrating, used to fighting Indian armies locked into predictable patterns. Innovation demanded resources, and Tipu built a state designed to sustain war. Taxation was redirected toward the army, forts stocked in advance for sieges, and state-run workshops produced rockets, muskets, and ammunition. Even roads were improved so armies could move faster and supplies reach the front. Mysore itself became a war machine, structured for defiance. The battlefield results proved his vision. In one clash, volleys of rockets streaked across the sky, bursting among British lines. Smoke, fire, and thunder filled the field as horses bolted and infantry formations collapsed. For the company, long accustomed to one-sided encounters, the shock was profound. For Tipu, it was proof his unorthodox methods could wound even an empire. What truly unsettled the British was not only the damage, but the chaos. Their officers were trained to value order and precision. Tipu's weapons injected disorder directly into their way of war. Fear itself became one of his tools, each barrage reminding them that Mysore would not bend quietly. This reputation set him apart from his peers. While many rulers bargained away territory or accepted company control, Mysore projected ingenuity and resistance. Rockets could not win wars alone, but they forced Britain to recognize a defiance they believed impossible. His army became both a weapon and a symbol, proof that empire could be resisted, at least for a time. But this strength carried costs. Resources funneled into war placed heavy strain on Mysore's people. Farmers, merchants, and labourers all bore the weight of Tipu's ambition. To the British, he was the most dangerous ruler in India. To his subjects, he was at once protector and burden. And so, a question haunted both sides. Why did this one man matter so much that Britain would fight 4 wars just to bring him down? Across 4 Anglo-Mysore wars, Tipu Sultan's defiance turned a regional conflict into one of the longest struggles the East India Company ever faced in India. Mysore repeatedly stalled the company's advance, sometimes forcing humiliating treaties. But over time, Britain and its Indian allies slowly eroded his strength. The wars revealed both Tipu's determination to resist and the steep price his kingdom would pay for that defiance. The first war began under Hyder Ali, Tipu's father, but it was there that Tipu proved himself more than an heir. Mysore's armies struck deep, capturing forts and pressing into contested lands. By the Second Anglo-Mysore War, Tipu commanded outright, and his bold maneuvers unsettled British generals. In 1780, his forces ambushed and nearly annihilated a British detachment in a wooded pass. Over the next 2 years, he seized garrisons and expanded Mysore's reach so far that Madras itself seemed threatened. The war ended not in British triumph, but in the Treaty of Mangalore in 1784, one of the few moments when the company was forced to negotiate as equals. Across India, the message was clear. Britain could be checked. But later wars exposed the limits of defiance. By the Third and Fourth Wars, the company had learned its lesson. No longer fighting Mysore alone, it secured alliances with the Marathas and the Nizam of Hyderabad, closing in from every side. With disciplined troops and coordinated supply lines, the company slowly strangled Mysore. Tipu's campaigns of expansion gave way to battles of survival as he faced a tightening circle of enemies. Tipu's vision was never confined to India. He reached outward, appealing to the French and even the Ottoman Sultan, casting his fight as part of a wider struggle against British power. French engineers lent their skills, and small bands of soldiers joined him, but European aid never came in the strength he hoped for. The wars in Europe always took precedence. Letters were written, promises exchanged, but on the battlefields of southern India, Mysore stood alone. Even so, Tipu's forces remained a menace. Cavalry raids slashed across supply lines, rocket volleys startled British troops, and skirmishes flared in forests and plains unfamiliar to company soldiers. Rumours of his approach stirred panic in colonial towns, and his name inspired both fear and admiration. Yet every gain came at a cost. To keep his army supplied, Mysore itself bled. Villages stripped of grain, merchants pressed for funds, artisans turned into arms makers. Your ambition revealed its double edge. The same will that kept Mysore resisting also strained it to the breaking point. Roads once meant for trade became lifelines of war. Fields meant for harvest fed garrisons instead. The treasury emptied again and again into fortresses, cavalry and rockets. For farmers and labourers, the war was not distant politics. It was daily sacrifice. As the wars dragged on, these burdens deepened divisions. Soldiers still rallied to their sultan, but whispers of discontent grew louder. Some subjects questioned his demands, some even aided his enemies. Tipu's resolve prolonged resistance longer than most rulers could dream, yet the weight of that resistance hollowed out his state. By the end of the Fourth War, Mysore was no longer a rising power, but a fortress under siege. Tipu had proven the company was not invincible, but the struggle left his kingdom weakened, drained, and isolated. His ambition carved him into history, yet it also fractured the very society he fought to defend. Because ambition had not only turned outward against empire, in time, it bore down on his own people, and that is where his story darkens further. Inside Mysore, the glow of resistance looked different. What seemed from outside like a kingdom united against empire was, for many within its borders, a time of fear and upheaval. This was the shadow of Tipu Sultan's power, a drive for control that reshaped lives with lasting consequences. Sources from his reign and later archives describe campaigns in Malabar and Coorg marked by temple desecration, mass deportations and forced conversions, though historians still debate the scale and motives. Some accounts frame them as harsh measures to crush rebellion and cut off ties to the British or Portuguese. Others see them as part of his ambition to enforce tighter religious and political order. Whatever the explanation, the trauma they left is undeniable. The Malabar coast offers one of the starkest examples. Here, Hindu chieftains resisted Mysore's advance, but punishment reached far beyond the battlefield. Reports tell of villages burned, temples struck down, and whole families seized for relocation. Imagine a farmer returning from skirmish to find his family gone, marched inland and forced into an unfamiliar life. Letters attributed to Tipu speak of conversions and resettlements in these coastal regions. Though numbers vary across Persian records, British accounts, and local memory, the common thread: lives torn apart and communities scattered. The highlands of Coorg, Kodagu, suffered a similar fate. The Kodavars, mountain farmers and warriors, fiercely defended their valleys. When they defied Mysore, Tipu's response was ruthless. Thousands were captured, forced from their homeland, and marched away under guard. Oral traditions among the Kodavar people still speak of broken families and vanished lineages. Losses remembered not as defeats in battle, but as uprooting. Children raised in exile grew up far from the valleys their ancestors had once defended. Christian communities along the Kanara and Malabar coasts also bore scars. The most infamous moment came in 1785, remembered as the Ash Wednesday arrests. Records describe churches torn down, families detained, and thousands deported inland. Accounts speak of forced conversions or relocations meant to sever ties with coastal trade networks and suspected European allies. Imagine centuries-old mercantile families suddenly uprooted, homes emptied, and churches dismantled in a single sweep. Even Tipu's own orders confirm measures taken in these regions, though again, exact numbers remain disputed. These harsh campaigns revealed a contradiction. To some, Mysore was a shield, a state that stood firm against the company when others bowed. But to Kodavars exiled from their hills, or Christians torn from their coast, Tipu meant captivity, not liberation. This tension lies at the heart of his legacy. Historians sift through the same evidence: Persian letters, administrative registers, British records and oral memory, yet reach opposing conclusions. Critics point to brutality. Defenders argue he acted in wartime necessity. Wary of rebellion and foreign intrigue, his writings show both severity and anxiety, leaving his reputation suspended between protector and oppressor. For those who lived through it, the labels mattered little. Homes were lost, shrines desecrated, traditions weakened. These memories endured, shaping how Kadavar families and Mangalorean Christians passed down their histories. For them, the war against empire was inseparable from the war forced upon them in their own lands. The paradox is clear. The same ambition that built rockets, forged alliances, and defied empire also fractured his kingdom within. Fierce loyalty among soldiers coexisted with simmering resentment among communities, uprooted or coerced. That resentment became an opening, a crack rivals could exploit as surely as cannon fire. And over time, those cracks widened. Dissatisfaction, rival factions, and whispers of betrayal seeped into the heart of Tipu's rule, weakening the very strength that once terrified the company. Some of the deadliest blows to Tipu Sultan's rule did not come from cannons on the battlefield, but from whispers inside his own palace. Outwardly, Mysore still looked defiant, rockets streaking across the sky, walls of Seringapatam holding firm. Yet, within the royal court, ambition clashed with fear and loyalty bent beneath pressure. Espionage and betrayal became silent weapons. And for a ruler already stretched thin by war, this hidden battlefield proved as dangerous as any siege. Tipu's palace was as much a chamber of suspicion as of ceremony. Advisors vied for influence, generals weighed loyalty against survival, and administrators balanced duty with opportunity. Victories bred rivalries, setbacks bred doubt. Endless campaigns strained Mysore's nobility and merchants alike. Landholders faced heavier levies, trade shrank under taxation, and old elites saw themselves pushed aside by Tipu's chosen officers. Centralized control strengthened the throne, but festered resentment, fertile ground for company intrigue. The East India Company knew how to turn discontent into power. Its wealth from Bengal and Madras purchased not only armies but loyalties. Pensions, promises and bribes flowed quietly into Mysore. For courtiers chafing under Tipu's demands, such offers seemed like lifelines. Resentment and fear, when paired with company gold, produced betrayals worth more than regiments in the field. The most infamous name was Mir Sadiq, one of Tipu's senior officials. Accounts claim that during the final siege, he conspired with the British. Under cover of paying his men, he is said to have withdrawn troops from critical positions, just as the company prepared its assault. Later, when attackers pressed against Seringapatam's breached wall, he allegedly withheld reinforcements, leaving the opening exposed. The result was catastrophic. Company soldiers poured in with far less resistance than Tipu's plans had allowed. Many then and since have laid the fall of Seringapatam at Mir Sadiq's feet. Historians debate how deliberate his actions were. Some suggest confusion, others outright treachery. But the outcome was the same. Unity crumbled where it mattered most. For Tipu, this betrayal was more ruinous than artillery because it corroded the trust that bound his army together. The damage spread quickly. Soldiers began to doubt their officers. Officers doubted their peers. Orders slowed, coordination faltered, suspicion bled into every command. In an army where discipline and timing were survival, hesitation proved deadly. Generals, too, feared their strategies might be whispered to the enemy before the battle was joined. Planning gave way to paralysis. Tipu's own policies had made such fractures possible. Heavy taxes sidelined elites, and the crushing demands of war alienated parts of his administration. Many calculated survival coldly. If Mysore fell, safety lay with the company. Betrayal was not always ambition. Sometimes it was fear. Yet not all bent. Many soldiers and commanders remained loyal, standing with Tipu until the very end. But history often pivots on a handful of moments. In Mysore, a few acts of betrayal carried more weight than thousands of loyal swords. By 1799, as the company's guns thundered outside Seringapatam, Tipu faced not only the enemy at his gates, but the uncertainty of those beside him. Many accounts insist the city's walls fell as much to hands inside the palace as to the fire from outside. Intentions may remain disputed, but the outcome was undeniable. This atmosphere of intrigue shaped his final stand. Tipu fought not just against British steel, but against collapsing trust, fractured loyalty, and an empire closing in. And as the breach widened, Mysore was left to reckon with the price a ruler pays when betrayal grows inside his own walls. In May 1799, Mysore's capital faced its reckoning. The fortress of Seringapatam, long thought unbreakable, trembled beneath one of the fiercest sieges in Indian history. For weeks, smoke hung over the city and the thunder of cannon fire echoed through the night. Inside the walls lived not only soldiers, but families huddled in courtyards, children crying to the rhythm of bombardment, artisans clutching tools instead of weapons, and officials clinging to fading hope. Outside, a coalition far greater than Mysore could withstand, the East India Company, reinforced by Maratha and Hyderabad allies, pressed its grip tighter each day. At the center of it all, Tipu Sultan refused to flee. Advisors begged him to escape. Some whispered of hidden passages beneath the fortress, secret routes that could preserve his life so resistance might rise elsewhere. Others urged retreat, a chance to regroup and fight another day. But Tipu's answer never wavered. To leave Seringapatam was not a tactical withdrawal, it was surrender of honor. He believed a ruler must fall where his duty was bound, and for him, that place was Mysore's gates, not exile. The siege drained the city to exhaustion. Food dwindled, wells turned foul, and morale frayed as breaches opened despite frantic repairs of sand and stone. Families who had trusted the fortress to shield them found themselves trapped inside a city collapsing with each new barrage. For them, the fall of Seringapatam was not strategy. It was the ruin of home, security, and identity. When the final assault came in early May, it was swift and merciless. British and Allied troops stormed the breaches, flooding the narrow streets. Fighting raged under gateways and along alleys. Officers were struck down as they rallied defenders. Exhausted soldiers collapsed in lanes turned to battlegrounds. Reports speak of betrayal, local guides revealing hidden paths that hastened the city's fall. Even then, Tipu refused to retreat. Witnesses remembered him with sword and shield in hand, fighting near the gates. He struck down attackers in close quarters, pressing forward again and again until numbers and fatigue overtook him. His turban fell, but his sword still clutched as he tried one last blow. Surrounded, he fell in the chaos. Hours later, after the British had secured the city, his body was found among the slain. It was May 4th, 1799, the day the Tiger of Mysore made his final stand. The moment was decisive. His death ended any chance of Mysorean independence. For nearly half a century, the kingdom had resisted domination, first from rivals, then from the company. With Tipu gone, Mysore was reduced to a client of empire. His family was exiled, stripped of power and presence. The independence his father Hyder Ali had carved, and Tipu had defended with innovation, vanished in a single day. How to read his final act remains contested. Some call it courage, a ruler faithful to his city and unwilling to survive dishonor. Others see fatal rigidity, a refusal to preserve leadership when retreat might have kept the struggle alive. For those inside Seringapatam, families who endured siege, loss and exile, the question lingers still. Was it the ultimate defense of sovereignty, or the choice that ensured its end? What endures beyond debate is the image of his body, sword still in hand. To the company, it proved their greatest foe had fallen. To his followers, it created a legend, a ruler who met death at the line of defense, not in hiding. To both sides, the scene closed one chapter and opened another. Resistance had been broken, and colonial dominance in South India had begun. His death distilled the paradox of his life, a ruler who defied empire with brilliance and resolve, yet whose ambition weighed heavily on both enemies and his own people. The fall of the tiger shows how one man could embody both courage and destruction, innovation and peril in the same final choice. And it leaves us with a question history has never answered. When ambition shapes a life so completely, does it mark a leader as freedom fighter, tyrant, or something far less clear? Tipu Sultan's life reveals ambition at its sharpest edge. He was both innovator and enforcer, a defender against foreign power, and a ruler whose methods pressed heavily upon his own people. His campaigns against the company showed vision and resolve, yet his drive for control left scars still remembered within Mysore. His story survives in letters, registers, and local memory, and it is this blend of brilliance and burden that keeps his legacy contested, even 2 centuries later. So here is the question for you. Which matters more? Resistance to empire or the human cost within your own borders? Tell us which side of Tipu's legacy you lean toward and why. As the last light faded over Seringapatam, his story ended in battle and betrayal. But the memory of the Tiger of Mysore lingers still. Please like and subscribe so we can make more exhausting stories to share with you. And now, rest well, dream deeply, and until our next story, good night.